The emergency room at Weston Memorial never really became quiet. Even after midnight, the hallways stayed full of ringing phones, tired footsteps, crying children, and the soft beeping of machines behind closed curtains. The smell of antiseptic floated through the air while nurses moved quickly from room to room, trying to keep up with another exhausting night shift. Alina moved through the chaos calmly, as she always did. Her dark blue scrubs were slightly wrinkled from the long hours, and loose strands of hair had slipped from her bun hours ago. Still, she greeted every patient with the same gentle voice. She adjusted blankets, checked monitors, brought water to worried families, and listened when frightened people needed someone to talk to. Most patients barely noticed her face. To many people, she was simply another tired nurse rushing through the hospital halls. But the people who worked beside her knew different. She hasn't sat down once tonight, one younger nurse whispered near the supply station. That's Alina, another replied quietly. I don't think she knows how to stop helping people. Alina overheard them and smiled faintly without looking up from the patient chart in her hands. The truth was, helping others distracted her from thinking too much. Long nights at the hospital kept her mind busy. Silence was harder to handle than exhaustion. Around 1 in the morning, the automatic ER doors suddenly flew open. A man rushed inside carrying a teenage boy against his chest while another woman hurried behind him in tears. Somebody help my son, the man shouted. The waiting room immediately turned toward the noise. The boy looked pale, holding his arm tightly while breathing through clenched teeth. Blood stained part of his sleeve, though it did not appear life-threatening. A triage nurse quickly motioned them forward. We're here, Alina said calmly as she approached with a wheelchair. Let's get him seated so we can examine him. The man barely acknowledged her. Where's the doctor? He barked. The doctor is with another patient right now, Alina explained gently. But we'll start checking your son immediately. The man's jaw tightened with frustration. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in an expensive gray coat despite the late hour. His hair was slightly messy, as if he had rushed out of bed. Stress showed in every line on his face. His name was Grayson Vale, and tonight, he looked like a man carrying far more than fear for his son. My boy fell during practice, he said sharply. His arm may be broken. He's been waiting in pain for 20 minutes already. It's been 7 minutes, sir, the front desk worker quietly corrected. Grayson ignored her. His son, Nolan, looked embarrassed by the scene. Dad, I'm okay, the teenager muttered. Can you just calm down? I'll calm down when somebody does their job. The room fell awkwardly silent. Alina kept her voice steady. We are doing our job, sir. Let me take a look at his arm. Grayson reluctantly stepped aside while Alina knelt near the wheelchair. Nolan winced as she carefully examined the injury. I know that hurts, she said softly. But you're doing great. Nolan gave a small nod. Unlike his father, the boy seemed quiet and polite. He apologized twice while Alina adjusted his arm into a temporary support sling. Possible fracture, she told another nurse. Let's get imaging ready. As staff worked around them, Grayson paced impatiently beside the wall. Every few seconds he checked his phone. Messages continued appearing on the screen faster than he could answer them. His company had apparently been dealing with serious problems all week. Several employees had quit unexpectedly, and online criticism toward his business was growing quickly. The pressure had followed him home. Now his injured son had pushed him over the edge. After another few minutes, Grayson marched toward the nurse's station again. How much longer does this place take? He snapped. We're moving as quickly as we can, one nurse replied carefully. You call this quick? Alina stepped forward before the situation escalated. Sir, your son is stable, she said calmly. The doctor will see him very soon. That's not good enough. People in the waiting room began staring openly now. A mother pulled her young daughter closer. An older man lowered his newspaper slowly, watching the argument unfold. Alina kept her expression calm, though exhaustion tugged at her eyes. I understand you're worried, she said, but yelling at the staff won't help your son. Something about her calmness seemed to irritate Grayson even more. "You people always say that," he muttered bitterly. "Every hospital is the same. Nobody moves unless someone important walks through the door. We treat everyone seriously here." He gave a dry laugh. "Right?" Nolan looked miserable. "Dad," he whispered again, "please stop." But Grayson was no longer listening to anyone. The stress inside him had been building for months. Failed business deals, endless meetings, financial pressure, headlines criticizing his company, sleepless nights, constant anger. And now he stood in a crowded emergency room feeling helpless while his son sat in pain. His frustration needed somewhere to go. Unfortunately, Alina stood closest. "You know what the problem is?" Grayson said loudly. "People like you act calm while families suffer." Several nurses exchanged uncomfortable looks. Alina folded her hands quietly. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice." "Or what?" "Or security may ask you to step outside." Grayson stared at her in disbelief. "You're threatening me now?" "No," she answered softly. "I'm asking you to respect the staff." For a brief second, it looked like he might finally stop. Then another message buzzed loudly on his phone. He glanced down at the screen, and whatever he read seemed to crush the last bit of patience he had left. His face hardened instantly. "You have no idea what pressure looks like," he muttered. Alina noticed the trembling in his hands. "Maybe not," she replied gently. "But your son needs you calm right now." That sentence should have ended things. Instead, it somehow broke something inside him. Grayson stepped closer. "You think because you wear scrubs you can lecture me?" he said. The waiting room became completely silent. Alina remained still. "I'm trying to help your family. You're just a nurse." Before anyone fully realized what was happening, Grayson suddenly lashed out in anger and struck her across the side of her face. The sound shocked the entire room. Gasps filled the hallway. Nolan immediately stood up despite his injured arm. "Dad!" A nearby nurse covered her mouth in disbelief. Security guards rushed forward almost instantly as Grayson himself seemed frozen by what he had done. Alina staggered one small step sideways but did not fall. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The entire ER seemed suspended in silence. Then Nolan's voice cracked through the room. "What is wrong with you?" Grayson looked at his own hand like he no longer recognized it. I didn't," but the words died in his throat. Security officers grabbed his arms carefully but firmly. "Sir, you need to come with us now." "I wasn't." "You need to leave the ER immediately." Nolan looked horrified. His mother began crying quietly near the chairs. And through all of it, Alina simply stood there holding one hand lightly against her cheek. One younger nurse rushed toward her. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Alina nodded once. "I'm fine." But her eyes looked distant for just a moment, as if something older and heavier than tonight's incident had suddenly returned to her memory. Grayson noticed that expression before security pulled him backward. Not fear, not anger, something sadder. As he was escorted away, people stared at him with disgust. Nolan refused to look at his father at all. The automatic doors closed behind the security team, and noise slowly returned to the emergency room. But the atmosphere had changed completely. One doctor walked over immediately. "We're calling the police," he said firmly. Alina shook her head. "Wait," the doctor frowned. "Alina, he assaulted you." "He lost control," she answered quietly. "That doesn't excuse this." "No," she admitted. "It doesn't." The younger nurse looked stunned. "You can't seriously let this go." Alina took a slow breath before lowering her hand from her cheek. A faint red mark had already appeared. "I just want to finish the shift." The doctor stared at her in disbelief. "You need a minute. There are still patients waiting." For a moment nobody knew what to say. Finally, the doctor sighed heavily. "At least sit down for 5 minutes." Alina gave a tired nod. She walked into a nearby staff room while whispers spread throughout the ER. Some staff members were furious. Others were simply shocked by how calm she remained. Inside the small break room, Alina sat alone beside the coffee machine. The buzzing fluorescent lights overhead filled the silence. Slowly, she touched the side of her face again, not because of pain, because the moment had awakened memories she spent years trying to bury. Yelling, fear, long nights filled with chaos, people breaking under pressure. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she heard soft footsteps near the doorway. Nolan stood there quietly holding his injured arm. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. Alina looked up in surprise. "You shouldn't apologize for someone else. He's not usually like that." She studied the teenager's face carefully. Beneath the embarrassment and fear, she saw something else. Disappointment. That hurt the deepest. "He's under stress," Nolan whispered. "But that doesn't make this okay." "No," Alina agreed softly. "It doesn't." The boy swallowed hard. "Are they arresting him?" "I don't know." Nolan looked down at the floor. He wasn't always angry like this. Alina's expression softened. People carry things they don't always know how to handle. "Still," his voice cracked slightly, "you didn't deserve that." For the first time that night, genuine emotion reached Alina's eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. A nurse soon entered to escort Nolan for x-rays. Before leaving, he paused once more at the doorway. "You stayed calm the whole time," he said. "How?" Alina looked toward the noisy hallway outside. Years of memories passed silently behind her eyes. Finally, she answered with a faint, tired smile. "Sometimes staying calm is the only thing keeping everything else from falling apart." Nolan nodded slowly, though he clearly did not fully understand. As the door closed again, Alina sat alone in the break room for another few seconds. Then she straightened her shoulders, stood up, and walked back into the crowded emergency room like nothing had happened. But across town, Grayson Vale sat alone inside his dark SUV outside the hospital parking lot, staring blankly through the windshield. And for the first time in many years, shame felt heavier than anger. Morning arrived slowly over Weston Memorial Hospital, but the tension from the night before had never really disappeared. Even during the early shift change, nurses whispered quietly near coffee machines and supply carts. Some spoke with anger. Others spoke with disbelief. A few simply shook their heads every time they remembered the sound that had echoed through the ER waiting room. Most of them had never seen anything like it happen so openly, especially not to Alina. "She should have pressed charges," one nurse muttered while organizing patient files. "She still can," another replied. "Administration is already reviewing the security footage." The first nurse sighed heavily. "I just don't understand how she stayed so calm." Neither did most people. At the end of the hallway, Alina sat alone in a small consultation room finishing paperwork from her overnight shift. Her face looked tired, and the faint mark near her cheekbone had darkened slightly overnight, though she tried not to draw attention to it. A paper cup of untouched coffee rested beside her elbow. She had barely slept. After leaving the hospital at sunrise, she had driven home to her quiet apartment, taken a short shower, and sat awake by the window while the city slowly came to life outside. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Nolan's voice again. "What is wrong with you?" Not angry, heartbroken. That part stayed with her more than the slap itself. Alina understood anger. She had seen people at their worst before. Fear and exhaustion could twist people into strangers, especially when someone they loved was hurt. But seeing a son look at his own father with disappointment like that, it carried a different kind of pain. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Everett stepped into the room holding a folder beneath one arm. "You're supposed to be home resting," he said gently. "I know. Then why are you here?" Alina offered a faint smile. "Because if I stay home too long, everyone will keep staring at me tomorrow." He pulled a chair closer and sat down across from her. "They're worried about you. They're angry. That too." Silence settled briefly between them. Dr. Everett had worked beside Alina for nearly 4 years. He knew she avoided talking about herself. She never complained, never raised her voice, never explained the deeper sadness that occasionally appeared behind her calm expression. Sometimes he wondered what kind of life taught someone to hide pain that well. The board wants a statement, he said carefully. Alina looked down at the paperwork in front of her. And the police? They're willing to move forward if you cooperate. She stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, she shook her head. No charges. Dr. Everett exhaled slowly, clearly frustrated. You realize that sends a message. I know. He assaulted a nurse in front of a full waiting room. He lost control. That still matters. Alina nodded softly. I'm not saying it doesn't. Then why protect him? That question lingered heavily in the room. Alina leaned back slightly in her chair and stared toward the window. I'm not protecting him, she said quietly. I just don't think destroying someone's life always fixes what's broken. Dr. Everett studied her face. You really believe that? I've seen enough people regret one terrible moment for the rest of their lives. Something about the way she said it made him stop arguing. Before he could respond, another nurse stepped into the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Alina, someone dropped this off for you. She handed over a small paper bag from the hospital cafe. Inside was a blueberry muffin and a handwritten note. I'm sorry about my dad. Thank you for helping me anyway. Nolan. Alina stared at the note quietly. Dr. Everett noticed the way her expression softened. That kid feels terrible. He should focus on healing his arm, she replied softly, but she carefully folded the note and slipped it into her pocket instead of throwing it away. Across town, Grayson Vale sat in the dining room of his large modern home, staring blankly at a television he wasn't really watching. The house was quiet, too quiet. His wife, Celeste, had barely spoken to him since they returned from the hospital. Nolan remained upstairs in his bedroom with a temporary cast on his arm, refusing to answer most questions. And Grayson could not escape the image replaying endlessly in his head. The look on Alina's face after he struck her. Not rage, not fear, just disappointment. His phone buzzed again across the table. Another message from his business partners. Another problem. Another article criticizing his company online. Usually, work stress distracted him from everything else. Today, it only made him feel worse. He picked up the phone and immediately froze. Someone had uploaded part of the hospital incident online. The video quality was shaky, filmed from across the waiting room, but the audio was painfully clear. You're just a nurse. Then the sudden movement, the shocked gasps, the silence afterward. Grayson immediately shut the video off. But it was too late. Thousands of comments already flooded the post. People were furious. Some demanded legal action. Others identified him by name within hours. His company's social media pages had already filled with criticism. He rubbed both hands over his face slowly. For the first time in years, he truly saw himself the way others did. Not stressed. Not overwhelmed. Cruel. A door opened upstairs. Nolan walked down carefully, holding his cast against his chest. Father and son looked at each other across the room. Neither spoke at first. Then Nolan quietly asked, "Did you see the video?" Grayson nodded once. "I'm sorry." The teenager gave a tired laugh without humor. "You keep saying that. I mean it. Then why did you do it?" Grayson opened his mouth but found no answer waiting. Because he honestly did not know anymore. Stress explained anger. It did not explain becoming someone your own son barely recognized. "I wasn't thinking," he finally muttered. Nolan looked away. That's the problem. Those words landed harder than any public criticism online. Grayson swallowed heavily. "Is your arm okay?" "It's fractured." "I'm glad it wasn't worse." Nolan nodded faintly but stayed distant. After a long silence, he spoke again. "She still helped me after everything." Grayson looked up slowly. "What?" "The nurse. Alina." Nolan's voice softened. "Even after what happened, she still made sure I got treated." Grayson stared at the table. Shame twisted deeper inside his chest. A few moments later, the front doorbell rang. Celeste answered it from the hallway. Then she returned holding an envelope. "It's from the hospital," she said quietly. Grayson stood immediately, anxiety tightening his stomach. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a short formal notice requesting his presence at Weston Memorial the following afternoon regarding the incident. No further details. No explanation. His heartbeat quickened. "Are they pressing charges?" Celeste asked. "I don't know." Nolan watched silently from the stairs. Grayson folded the paper slowly. For the rest of the afternoon, tension hung heavily over the house. Meanwhile, back at Weston Memorial, rumors spread faster than patient updates. By lunchtime, nearly everyone had heard about the online video. Some staff members defended Alina fiercely. Others worried the hospital's reputation would suffer. A younger nurse named Brielle found Alina restocking supplies alone. "You really aren't angry?" Brielle asked carefully. Alina placed gauze boxes onto a shelf before answering. "Of course I'm angry." Brielle blinked in surprise. "You don't seem angry." "That doesn't mean I'm not." The younger nurse leaned against the doorway. "Then why hide it?" Alina paused briefly. "Because anger can spread faster than anything else in a hospital." Brielle stayed quiet. "You know what scared me most last night?" Alina continued softly. "Not him." "Then what?" "The way everyone else looked afterward." Confused, Brielle frowned. They looked shocked. They looked ready to hate him forever. Brielle crossed her arms. "Maybe he deserved that." "Maybe," Alina admitted. "But I've seen what happens when people stop believing someone can become better than their worst moment." Something about her tone carried deep personal experience. Before Brielle could ask more, Alina changed the subject immediately. "Did room 12 get their blood results yet?" The conversation ended there. That evening, after her shift finally ended, Alina drove home through cold rain and nearly empty streets. Her apartment building sat quietly near the edge of the city. Small, simple, forgettable, exactly how she preferred it. Inside, she changed into comfortable clothes and heated leftover soup in silence. The television stayed off. Her phone buzzed several times with messages from coworkers checking on her, but she answered only a few. Then her phone rang again unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. After a pause, she answered. "Hello." For a moment, only silence answered back. Then a deep male voice spoke carefully. "Is this Alina?" Her expression changed instantly. Not fear. Recognition. "Yes. We heard what happened." Alina closed her eyes briefly. "You didn't need to call. We were already planning to visit next week." Another silence passed between them. Then the man spoke again, his tone respectful and calm. "You know we don't ignore things like this." Alina looked out the rain-covered window. "It's handled." "Are you sure?" Her voice softened. "Yes." The man hesitated before replying quietly. "Some people still remember what you did for them." Emotion flickered across her face. "That was a long time ago." "Not for us." After the call ended, Alina remained standing beside the window for a long while. Outside, rain continued falling over the city lights. Inside another part of town, Grayson sat awake in his dark office long past midnight, staring at the hospital notice again and again. He expected lawyers, police, public humiliation. But deep down, another feeling unsettled him more. The strange calm in Alina's eyes, the quiet phone call she had received earlier that evening, and the growing sense that the woman he dismissed as just a nurse carried a past he knew absolutely nothing about. The next afternoon, Weston Memorial Hospital felt unusually tense. People tried to continue their normal routines, but everyone seemed distracted. Nurses whispered near supply rooms. Receptionists glanced toward the front entrance every few minutes. Even patients noticed the strange energy hanging over the building. The video from the ER had spread far beyond the city overnight. Some local news pages had reposted it. Online comments continued multiplying by the hour. Hospital administrators spent most of the morning in meetings discussing public response and possible legal action. And somewhere in the middle of all that attention sat Alina, quietly updating patient charts like nothing had changed. The faint bruise near her cheek had faded slightly beneath makeup, though though it remained visible if someone looked closely enough. Brielle stepped beside her station carrying 2 coffees. "You've had exactly 3 hours of sleep, haven't you?" she asked. Alina accepted 1 cup with a small smile. "Maybe 4. That's not healthy. Neither is working emergency medicine." Brielle laughed softly before lowering her voice. "Administration's waiting for that guy to arrive." Alina's fingers paused over the keyboard briefly. Grayson. She had not said his name once since the incident happened. "He'll probably bring lawyers," Brielle continued. "Or some public relations team. Maybe. You really aren't nervous?" Alina looked toward the crowded hallway. "I'm more worried about room 16 yelling at me again because his pudding is late." Brielle shook her head in disbelief. "You're impossible." Before Alina could answer, Dr. Everett approached with a serious expression. "They're here," he said quietly. The atmosphere near the nurses' station shifted immediately. Several staff members subtly turned toward the hospital entrance down the corridor. Through the glass doors, Grayson Vale stepped inside wearing a dark coat and tense expression. Beside him walked Celeste and Nolan. The teenager's arm remained secured in a sling. The moment people recognized them, whispers spread instantly. Grayson felt every stare. Some were angry, others judgmental, a few openly disgusted. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to walk into a room where people had already decided exactly who you were. And after what he had done, he could not blame them. Nolan stayed close beside his mother while Grayson approached the reception desk. "I received a request to come here," he said quietly. The receptionist nodded stiffly. "Administration is expecting you. 3rd floor conference room." Grayson swallowed hard. No police waiting. No reporters. Just tension. As they walked toward the elevators, Nolan suddenly slowed. His eyes had found Alina across the hallway. She stood beside a medication cart, speaking softly with an elderly patient. Completely calm. Completely professional. As if the entire world had not spent the last 24 hours discussing what happened to her. Nolan gently touched his father's arm. "That's her." Grayson looked up. For a second, Alina glanced toward them. Their eyes met briefly. No anger crossed her face. That somehow made things worse. Grayson looked away almost immediately. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the family stepped inside. No one spoke during the ride up. On the 3rd floor, an administrator greeted them outside a conference room. "Mr. Vale," she said carefully. "Thank you for coming." Grayson nodded once. "Am I being charged?" The administrator hesitated. "That discussion has not been finalized." Not finalized. Those words offered little comfort. Inside the conference room, several hospital board members already waited around a long table. Papers rested neatly in front of them. The atmosphere felt formal but strangely uncertain. Grayson sat down slowly while Celeste and Nolan remained near the wall. One administrator cleared his throat. "Mr. Vale, we take incidents involving staff safety very seriously. I understand. What occurred in our emergency department was unacceptable." Grayson lowered his eyes briefly. "You're right." The board members exchanged small surprised glances. They had clearly expected defensiveness. Instead, he looked exhausted, ashamed. "I'm not here to excuse myself," Grayson continued quietly. "I lost control. There's no justification for that." One board member folded her hands. "The nurse involved has declined to press charges at this time." That stunned him. "She what?" "She requested no criminal action." Grayson stared blankly across the table. "Why?" No one answered. Because none of them truly understood either. Before the conversation could continue, another administrator hurried into the room looking unexpectedly nervous. "There's a situation downstairs." "What kind of situation?" The man hesitated awkwardly. "You should probably see this yourselves." Confused looks spread around the table. A few moments later, the group stepped into the hallway. That was when they heard it. Voices downstairs near the main lobby. Not loud, but serious, professional, and unfamiliar. When the elevator doors opened onto the 1st floor, Nearly half the hospital staff seemed gathered near the entrance area, pretending not to stare openly. 3 older men in formal military uniforms stood near the front desk. Marine generals. Every conversation in the lobby had practically stopped. Their uniforms were covered with ribbons and medals that immediately drew attention. Even people with no military background could tell these were highly respected men. The tallest among them, silver-haired with a calm but commanding presence, spoke politely with hospital security. "We're not here to cause disruption," he explained. "We simply came to visit someone." Security looked uncertain but respectful. "Of course, sir." The moment Grayson stepped off the elevator and saw them, confusion spread across his face. What were Marine generals doing here? One of the nurses whispered under her breath. "Are they here because of the video?" Nobody knew. Then something even stranger happened. The tallest general looked past the crowd toward the far hallway and smiled. "Lieutenant Hale," he said warmly. The entire lobby turned. Alina had just stepped out from a patient room carrying a clipboard. The second she heard that title, she froze. A silence fell over the room so suddenly that even distant monitor beeps seemed louder. Brielle blinked in confusion beside her. "Lieutenant." Alina slowly looked up. For the first time since the incident, genuine surprise crossed her face. The 3 generals walked toward her together. Not casually, respectfully, like men greeting someone they deeply admired. Hospital staff stared in complete disbelief. The silver-haired general stopped directly in front of Alina. For one brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then the general smiled softly. "You still disappear faster than anyone I've ever known." A faint laugh escaped Alina before emotion quickly replaced it. "You weren't supposed to come. We heard about the incident. That video travels fast. It always does these days." The second general, broader and older, shook his head gently while looking at the bruise near her cheek. "You always did attract trouble while staying calmer than everyone else." Several nurses openly stared now. Dr. Everett looked completely lost. "Alina," he said slowly. "What exactly is happening?" She looked suddenly uncomfortable with all the attention. "Nothing important." The generals exchanged amused looks immediately. "Nothing important?" the third general repeated. "You saved lives beside combat teams for 6 years." The lobby became dead silent again. Even Grayson stopped breathing for a second. "Combat teams?" The silver-haired general turned toward the confused hospital staff. "You all know her as Nurse Alina Hale," he said calmly. "We knew her as one of the finest trauma specialists ever attached to Marine evacuation units overseas." Shock spread visibly across several faces. Brielle blinked repeatedly. "You were military?" Alina looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. "A long time ago." The older general folded his arms. "She trained medics under live-fire conditions." Another added quietly, "and refused evacuation herself twice while treating wounded soldiers." Dr. Everett stared at her in disbelief. "You never told anyone that." Alina shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't relevant." "Not relevant?" Brielle whispered. Grayson felt something heavy settle inside his chest. Suddenly her calmness in the ER made terrible sense. The way she handled pressure, the sadness behind her eyes, the refusal to escalate violence. This woman had lived through things far beyond anything he could imagine. And he had reduced her to just a nurse. Nolan looked at Alina with complete amazement. "You were in combat zones?" She gave a small, reluctant nod. "For a while." The silver-haired general smiled warmly at Nolan. "Your nurse once treated injured Marines in places most people would never survive a week." Alina sighed softly. "You're making this sound dramatic." It was dramatic. Hospital employees continued staring as pieces finally clicked together in their minds. The discipline, the composure, the scars nobody noticed because she hid them beneath quiet kindness. One administrator cleared his throat awkwardly. "General, forgive me. But how do you know about yesterday's incident?" The general's expression became serious again. "Because several retired Marines contacted us after recognizing Lieutenant Hale online." He glanced toward Alina carefully. Many people owe her their lives. Emotion quietly spread through the lobby. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, real. Then the general finally noticed Grayson standing several feet away. The atmosphere shifted instantly, not hostile, but firm. Grayson straightened nervously beneath the older man's gaze. The general walked toward him slowly. "You're Mr. Vale?" "Yes, sir." For a long moment the general simply studied him. Then he spoke quietly. "Do you know what kind of person she is?" Grayson swallowed hard. "I'm starting to realize I didn't." The general nodded once. "Most people don't. Because she never tells them." Alina stepped forward quickly before tension could grow worse. "This doesn't need to become bigger than it already is." The general looked back at her with clear respect. "You always say that." "Because it's true." Another silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Nolan stepped toward Alina himself. "I told you he wasn't always angry," he said softly. Emotion flickered across Grayson's face instantly. Alina looked at the teenager carefully before answering. "No one is only their worst moment." Grayson lowered his eyes immediately. Those words hurt more than judgment ever could. Because after everything he had done, she was still trying to protect his humanity in front of everyone watching. The hospital lobby remained unusually quiet even after the Marine generals arrived. People still stood in small groups pretending to continue their work, but nobody was truly focused anymore. Every few seconds, eyes drifted back toward Alina, the woman many of them had worked beside for months or even years without knowing her past. Grayson Vale stayed near the edge of the gathering, feeling smaller with every passing moment. He had entered the hospital expecting judgment or consequences for his actions. Instead, he was standing in front of people who seemed to respect the nurse he had hurt in a way he could not understand. Nolan stood closer to Alina now, still processing everything he had heard. His arm rested carefully in the sling, but his attention was completely fixed on her. The silver-haired general finally spoke again, his voice calm but steady. "It's strange seeing you here like this," he said to Alina. Alina gave a small, tired sigh. "I told you I wanted a quiet life. That's never really worked out for you," he replied with a faint smile. A few nearby nurses exchanged glances, still confused by the familiarity between them. It was clear this was not just a professional connection. There was history here, long, serious history. The second general crossed his arms and looked around the hospital. "Do you mind if we step somewhere more private?" he asked. Dr. Everett immediately nodded. "Of course. We can use the conference room again." Within minutes, the group moved upstairs. The atmosphere in the hospital corridors shifted as they passed. Staff members paused mid-task just to watch them go by. Even patients in waiting areas noticed something unusual was happening. In the conference room, the door closed softly behind them. The three generals sat on one side of the table. Hospital administrators sat opposite them. Grayson and Celeste remained near the back, while Nolan stayed close to Alina, almost instinctively. Alina stood instead of sitting. She always preferred standing when conversations turned complicated. The silver-haired general leaned forward slightly. "We didn't come here to create attention," he said. "We came because we heard what happened." Alina folded her hands in front of her. "It doesn't need military involvement." The third general, younger than the others but still clearly experienced, shook his head. "It already has it, whether you want it or not." A quiet tension filled the room. Grayson shifted uncomfortably. "I still don't understand," he said carefully. "Why are you all here for her?" The first general looked at him directly. "Because she saved lives that most of us couldn't have saved without her." That statement hit the room harder than expected. Celeste looked down, suddenly unsure of what to say. Nolan stared at Alina again, as if seeing her for the first time. The general continued. "During overseas missions, evacuation units often arrive after combat situations. Chaos, limited resources, difficult conditions. She worked in all of them." He paused briefly. "And she never left until every patient she could save was stable." Alina exhaled quietly. "That was part of the job." The second general gave a small smile. For most people, yes. For you, it was something else. Grayson listened silently, feeling increasingly out of place in the room. The general continued speaking, his voice softening slightly. There was one mission where a medical transport unit was delayed for hours due to unstable conditions in the area. We had multiple injured personnel and very limited support. Most medical staff had already evacuated. He looked at Alina. You stayed. Alina's expression tightened slightly. I wasn't alone. But you refused to leave when ordered. Silence followed that statement. Even Alina didn't respond immediately. The general leaned back slightly. You stabilized critical cases under pressure while coordinating movement for evacuation teams. You made decisions that normally take entire command units. The hospital administrators listened in shock. They had worked with her for years. None of them had ever heard this version of her life. Brielle, who had quietly joined the group near the back of the room, whispered under her breath. That's insane. The younger general nodded toward her. It is. And it's not the only time. He looked at Grayson briefly before continuing. There were situations where she treated people on both sides of conflict without hesitation. Injured soldiers don't care about politics when they're bleeding. She understood that better than most. Grayson lowered his gaze. Every word made him feel heavier, because he had reduced someone like this to a moment of anger in a crowded emergency room. The first general spoke again. We contacted her after she left military service because we thought she would continue in trauma specialization at a national-level hospital or medical unit. He glanced at Alina. She chose a civilian hospital instead. Alina gave a small shrug. It was quieter. The second general laughed softly. Nothing about your life has ever been quiet. A few people in the room smiled faintly, but the tension remained. Dr. Everett finally spoke. Why didn't anyone know this? Alina answered simply. Because it wasn't necessary. But it changes everything, he replied. She shook her head slightly. No, it doesn't. I'm still a nurse. The silver-haired general studied her carefully. You're still trying to disappear. Alina didn't deny it. A long silence followed. Grayson finally spoke again, his voice lower now. I want to understand something. The generals turned toward him. He hesitated. After everything she's done, why would she accept what happened yesterday without reacting? All eyes briefly shifted to Alina. She seemed tired of the attention, but she answered anyway. Because I've seen what happens when people are treated like they can't recover from their worst moment. Grayson frowned slightly. That doesn't justify what I did. No, she said firmly. It doesn't. Her honesty surprised him. She wasn't excusing him, but she wasn't destroying him either. That balance confused him more than anything. Nolan stepped forward slightly. She didn't even want to press charges, he said quietly. Grayson closed his eyes for a moment. Shame deepened again. The second general leaned forward. Let me be clear, he said. What happened in that ER was unacceptable. We are not here to excuse it. Grayson nodded immediately. I understand. But, the general continued, we are also not here to watch someone like her be dismissed or disrespected. He looked directly at Grayson. You should know who you are dealing with before you decide what someone deserves. The words were calm, but firm. Grayson said nothing. He couldn't, because for the first time, he realized the situation was no longer about punishment or apology. It was about understanding what he had failed to see. Meanwhile, outside the conference room, hospital staff continued reacting to what they had learned. Conversations spread through hallways and break rooms faster than any official memo could control. Some nurses felt proud. Others felt stunned. A few simply felt guilty for ever thinking of Alina as just another quiet coworker. Brielle leaned against a wall outside the room, speaking softly to another nurse. I can't believe she never said anything. Would you? The other nurse replied. Brielle thought about it. No, she admitted. Inside the room, the conversation shifted again. The younger general looked at Alina. We didn't come here just to speak about your past, he said. We came because people like you shouldn't have to deal with situations like yesterday alone. Alina shook her head immediately. I already told you. It's handled. The general sighed. You always say that. I always mean it. Grayson finally spoke again. Quieter this time. Can I say something? The room turned toward him. He hesitated before continuing. I don't expect forgiveness. Nolan looked at him, expression unreadable. I don't even expect understanding. He swallowed hard. But I need to say that I saw something yesterday I didn't understand at the time. He glanced briefly at Alina. And now I do. Silence filled the room again. Alina didn't respond. Not because she didn't hear him, but because she was watching him carefully, as if deciding whether his words carried real weight or just temporary emotion. The silver-haired general broke the silence. That's a start, he said. Grayson nodded slightly. It's not enough. No, the general agreed. It isn't. A faint, uncomfortable truth settled over the group. Nothing about this situation could be resolved quickly. Not guilt. Not reputation. Not misunderstanding. Not years of hidden history suddenly revealed in one afternoon. Alina finally spoke again. I don't want this to become something bigger than it already is. The younger general gave a soft but knowing smile. It already is bigger. She looked away briefly. That seemed to bother her more than anything else. Nolan stepped closer to her. Are you going to be okay? He asked quietly. Alina looked at him for a moment. I always am. But something in her voice suggested otherwise. Outside the hospital, the sky began to darken as evening approached. Rain clouds gathered again over the city, casting long shadows over Weston Memorial. Inside, the conference room remained still. Too many truths had been spoken in too short a time. And somewhere in that silence, Grayson Vale understood something he had not understood before. This was not the end of the story. It was only the moment where everything he believed about people like Alina started to fall apart. The conference room stayed quiet long after the generals finished speaking. No one seemed ready to be the first to move. The weight of everything shared in that room had settled deeply into each person there. It was no longer just about a hospital incident or a viral video. It had become something far more complicated. Something tied to years of hidden history and unspoken sacrifices. Alina stood near the table, her arms loosely folded, her expression calm but distant. She had always been good at looking composed even when her thoughts were heavy. But now, even that calmness seemed more fragile than usual. Grayson Vale sat a few feet away, still processing everything he had heard. The man who had walked into the hospital earlier that day with anger and pride no longer felt like the same person. He kept replaying the general's words in his mind, especially the parts about Alina's past. Each detail made what he had done feel worse, not better. Nolan sat beside his mother, watching his father quietly. There was no anger in his face anymore, only confusion mixed with disappointment that he didn't fully know how to express. The silver-haired general finally stood. We've said what we came to say, he said calmly. The rest is not ours to decide. The other two generals followed his lead. Before leaving, the first general looked at Alina one last time. You don't have to carry everything alone, he said gently. Alina gave a small nod, but didn't answer. The generals left the room together, their footsteps fading down the hallway. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted again. Now it was only hospital staff, Grayson's family, and Alina. Dr. Everett exhaled slowly. I think we all need a moment, he said. But Alina shook her head. There's still work to do. Of course she would say that. Even after everything. She turned slightly toward Grayson. I want to make something clear, she said quietly. Grayson looked up immediately. I didn't stay silent yesterday because I was weak. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. I stayed silent because I didn't want one mistake to define everything else. Her voice remained steady, but there was something deeper behind it. People break under pressure, she continued. Some loudly, some quietly, but breaking doesn't always mean the end. Grayson swallowed hard. I know that doesn't excuse what I did. It doesn't, she agreed. Silence followed again. This time it felt more honest than heavy. Nolan finally spoke from his seat. Are you going to be okay at work? Alina looked at him, surprised by the question. I'll be fine. You shouldn't have to just be fine, he said quietly. That simple sentence lingered in the room longer than expected. Celeste, who had stayed mostly silent until now, finally stepped forward. I think we need to go home, she said gently. Grayson didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on Alina, not in anger anymore, but in something closer to regret mixed with understanding. I want to apologize properly, he said. Alina shook her head slightly. You already did. That wasn't enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, she replied. It just has to be real. That seemed to hit him harder than anything else. Real. He nodded slowly. Then something unexpected happened. He stood up. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Just tired. I was wrong, he said plainly. About you. About that moment. About a lot of things. No one interrupted him. I let stress turn into anger. I let frustration turn into blame. And I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. His voice cracked slightly near the end. I can't undo that. Alina watched him carefully, still unreadable. Grayson continued. But I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Nolan looked at his father, searching his face for something familiar. Maybe confidence. Maybe control. But what he saw instead was something he wasn't used to seeing there. Honesty. That unsettled him more than anger ever had. Alina finally spoke again. Then start there, she said. Grayson nodded. I will. A long pause followed. Then Dr. Everett gently stepped forward. I think it's best if we all take this one step at a time, he said. Everyone slowly began to move. The meeting was ending, but nothing felt finished. Outside the conference room, the hospital had returned to its usual rhythm, but the mood was different. People still worked, still treated patients, still moved quickly through corridors, but there was a quiet awareness now that something had changed inside the building. Alina walked out first. She didn't look back. Not because she was avoiding anything, but because she had learned long ago that looking back too long made it harder to keep moving forward. Brielle caught up with her in the hallway. You're leaving already? She asked. Alina nodded. My shift is done. You could take the rest of the day off. I already did. Brielle hesitated. Do you want to talk about it? Alina gave a faint smile. There's not much to say. That's not true. Alina stopped walking for a moment. Then she said softly, sometimes the story isn't about what happened. It's about what people choose to do after it. Brielle nodded slowly, still unsure. Before she could respond, Alina continued walking. Meanwhile, Grayson and his family left the hospital through a different exit. The night air outside was cooler now. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, and traffic moved steadily in the distance. Nolan walked slightly ahead of his parents. Grayson followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, shoulders lower than they had been in years. Celeste finally spoke. Are you going to fix this? She asked. Grayson didn't answer immediately. I don't know, he admitted. That's not good enough. I know. They reached the car. Nolan stopped before getting in. Dad, he said quietly. Grayson looked at him. I don't hate you, Nolan said. Those words landed strangely. Not comforting. Not forgiving. Just honest. But I don't understand you right now either. Grayson nodded. I don't either. That was the most truthful thing he had said all day. Nolan got into the car. Celeste followed without another word. Grayson stayed outside for a moment longer, staring back at the hospital building. From the outside, it looked like any other large medical facility. But he now knew it held stories far bigger than what anyone could see. He finally got into the car. As they drove away, silence filled the vehicle. Back inside the hospital, Alina stood alone near a window in a quiet hallway. Rain had started again. Soft at first, then steady. She watched it fall across the glass, distorting the lights outside into blurred patterns. Her reflection stared back at her faintly. For a moment, she thought about everything that had happened in the past 2 days. The ER, the incident, the video, the generals, Grayson. Nolan, and all the people who now looked at her differently. She exhaled slowly, not tired, not relieved, just thoughtful. Footsteps approached behind her. Dr. Everett joined her side. "Long day," he said. She nodded. "It's not over for everyone." He glanced at her. "You're not responsible for fixing him, you know?" "I know. But you still feel like you are." She didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, "People don't usually need fixing. They need chances." Dr. Everett studied her for a moment. "And what about you?" She looked at him. "I'm fine." He gave a small, knowing smile. "That's what you always say." A faint pause followed. Then he added, "But you don't have to disappear to stay strong." Alina didn't respond. Not because she disagreed, but because she wasn't sure yet what she believed anymore. Outside, the rain continued to fall over Weston Memorial Hospital, washing away the noise of the day but not the memories. Inside, life kept moving. Patients still needed care. Doctors still made decisions. Nurses still walked long corridors under harsh lights. And somewhere in all of that, a quiet truth lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed what happened. Some people are judged in a moment, but their real story takes much longer to understand.